The following teaching is possible thanks to the friends and partners of Spirit and Truth Fellowship International.
Well, welcome to this final couple videos on this section which I call joy blockers. We know that joy is that sense that bubbles up deep from within inside us. We've also looked at the things that we can do to connect with joy or to develop more joy in our lives. But there's also things that we do unintentionally, possibly, that prevent or block joy. Well, the first thing seems probably fairly logical. If developing a closer relationship with God is what helps us to be able to develop more joy, then anything that we would put in front of our relationship with God is going to hinder joy. And we would call that idolatry. I like to think of idolatry kind of like worshiping the moon during an eclipse, when in fact the moon is actually blocking the sun. The sun would represent God, and that's who we should worship. But here we are, we're worshiping this object that's in front of the glory of God. And it would be God who gives us life and God who sustains us in the same way that the sun gives the energy to the earth for plants and all of life. Why would we want to worship the thing that blocks the source of life? And that's what idolatry is like. Idolatry is whenever we look to anything for meaning or for purpose or for the things that we need in life other than the true source of those things, which should be God. Many people have improperly thought of idolatry as it was more clearly in the Old Testament, when people would actually bow down and worship things and worship false gods. Well, they didn't understand the nature of the world and the physical realities of the scientific principles and all of those kinds of things. And so things that we now understand, where rain comes from and all of the natural processes, they tried to make sense of that. So they knew that there was a greater spiritual power, and they would worship things. Unfortunately, they were worshiping the wrong things. And God is the true source of those things. But God also gives some insight in the book of Ezekiel. In Ezekiel 14:4, he says concerning idolatry, "Therefore speak to them and tell them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. When any Israelite sets up idols in his heart," and he goes on to say, "I, the Lord, will answer him myself in keeping with his great idolatry." See, idols actually are a heart affair. And when we have something in our heart which is more important, or something that we look to for our source of meaning in life or the source of the goods and the things that we need in life, anything other than the true God, then we are actually committing idolatry. You don't need to be bowing down to something to commit idolatry. If you're bowing down in your heart, you're looking to something other than God in your heart. He says the same thing essentially in Ezekiel 14:7, where he goes on and says, "When any Israelite or any alien living in Israel separates himself from me and sets up idols in his heart and puts a wicked stumbling block before his face." See, as I mentioned in the previous sessions, one of the greatest ways we can develop joy is by drawing nearer to God, being more connected to God. So it only makes sense then that if we put something that hinders that relationship, like the moon before the sun, then that can absolutely block joy in our life. In Colossians 3:13, it says, "Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave." The reason I read that verse is because I find so many people that have difficulty forgiving. But not only that, the verse says, "Forgive whatever grievances." The thing that prevents us from forgiving is pride. It's actually an idol that we set up. We make our will more important than what God is commanding us to do. And so I read this just in the sense of search your heart. Look for things that are blocking you. Anything that is blocking you from doing what God is asking you to do, it's an idol. And when he says, that to forgive any grievance, I mean, he just doesn't say forgive some grievances or only those grievances which, are minor. He says forgive whatever grievance. One of the ways in which we can identify an idol is to see what happens when someone attacks it or goes to tear it down. I think of the stock market crash that happened in 2008 where, the market lost tremendous sums of value. And what happened? We actually heard of stockbrokers and other people who are throwing themselves in front of subway trains and, over 100 suicides directly connected within a couple-day period right to that event. Whenever an idol is torn down, it creates a sense of despondency in a person's heart. And that's a great key, is to see, why would someone feel so helpless? And, so the stock market crashes, you still have life, yet they throw themselves in front of cars. It's because they've put all of their worship and all of their heart into an object. And when that object gets torn down, it creates that sense of despondency. In Psalm chapter 16, verse 11, it says, "You have made known to me the path of life. You will fill me with the joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand." If we want joy, we need to remove idols, and we need to make sure that we're worshiping the true God and that we're drawing near to His presence.